So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, the Detroit Lions saw a lot of success in the 2022 season. They brought in a lot of players that helped the Lions reach their 9-8 record, helped them really reach their ceiling on the 2022 season, and players that just overall were very impactful and influential on the 2022 season for the Detroit Lions. However, most of those players are expected to hit the free agency market. Many of last year's contributors and many of last year's stars are expected to hit the market in free agency and potentially sign with a different team. However, of course, before they get to that stage, the Lions are going to have a chance to re-sign these players. They're going to have a chance to go through all of their unrestricted free agents, try to negotiate a contract, and try to bring back some of the talent that helped the Lions reach the heights that they did a season ago. And today we're going to talk about those players, splitting up into three tier lists. Tier 1 being players the Lions need to re-sign, Tier 2 being players that should return at a bargain but not overpay for, and Tier 3 being players that the Lions should let walk away. We're going to go over just about every single unrestricted free agent in this video for the Detroit Lions and talk about whether the Lions should bring them back at all costs, let them walk, or maybe bargain and see what the market price is for that player, and if it's right, bring the player back to Detroit. So, with that being said, let's start off with the Tier 1. Players the Lions must re-sign going into the 2023 season. Now, I think the biggest name in this free agency class for the Detroit Lions is Jamaal Williams. Jamaal Williams had his first 1,000-yard rushing season as a running back, and this last season broke the single-season rushing touchdown record that was held by Barry Sanders for over 2 decades. Jamaal Williams had a fantastic season with the Lions, and even though he wasn't the 100% bell cow number one running back, he did split carries. He didn't have great games every single week. He was a phenomenal running back for the Detroit Lions from a production standpoint, from a leader standpoint, and this is, I think, the biggest offensive playmaker the Lions need to bring back this season. One, because of his production, right? You can't let a guy that just set franchise single-season records walk away after his best year as a pro in his career. And secondly, the culture and the identity that he brings to the Detroit Lions is what has really built the culture over the last 2 years. Jamaal Williams was one of the first free agent signings of Brad Holmes, and since coming in, he's been a great player. He's been a great presence in the locker room. He's been a great culture builder. He's been a very good motivational guy, a very good leader in the locker room. And you just really can't afford to lose a guy like that, right? And yes, it's going to cost a little bit more money. I would expect Jamaal Williams to be one of the more expensive running backs in free agency, but it's not just his play. You're not just signing a number 2 running back. You're signing a leader. You're signing a potential captain. You're signing a franchise record setter. And you're signing somebody that embodies the culture of the Detroit Lions more than just about any other player. And for those reasons specifically, I think Jamaal Williams needs to be re-signed. In similar fashion, I think Alex Anzalone is another player on that list where he's kind of the Jamaal Williams of the defense, where yeah, he's not as goofy, yeah, he's not as, playing with people in the stands before games and playing catch with them and all kinds of that stuff, but he is a culture guy. He is a leader on the defense, and he's been here since day one, and he's been incredibly productive. Last season, Alex Anzalone totaled 125 tackles, 6 passes defended, an interception, 7 tackles for loss, a sack and a half, as well as a fumble recovery. So he's productive. Yes, he misses some tackles. Yes, he's out of position on occasion, but he makes a lot of plays as well that I don't think he gets credit for. And his leadership, the culture that he brings, the identity that he helps this Lions team have, I think is more valuable than the play and the statistics themselves. And he is a player that, for culture purposes, for identity purpose, for the narrative of, hey, these are our guys. These are who we're building Detroit through. And just having him here as a leader, as a culture guy, as a locker room presence, I think is certainly more valuable than even the contract he's going to get likely from the Detroit Lions this time around. Now, another player that needs to be re-signed is John Kaminsky. I think this was the most impactful free agent signing from last season. John Kaminsky was a waiver wire pickup, actually I think after camp had officially started, where he came over from the Atlanta Falcons. Now, John Kaminsky on paper didn't look great, right? 4 sacks, I think, in 12 or 13 games. Not necessarily somebody you'd look at and say, wow, that is a must re-sign. That is somebody that needs to be here in Detroit long term. But if you watch the games and you see John Kaminsky play, you'll know that he is one of the most impactful defensive players on this defense. And not only is he good for culture and identity, but he just makes everybody around him so much better. Now, where John Kaminsky may not necessarily show up on the stat sheet, everybody else does, right? In the games that he missed between the 4th and I believe the 7th week of the season, the Lions had 1 sack as a team, and that came on a 0 blitz with a free rusher to hit Kirk Cousins, right? Aiden Hutchinson went from 3 sacks in a game with John Kaminsky to 0 sacks over the next 3 games without him. John Kaminsky takes up double teams. John Kaminsky gets his hand on the football. John Kaminsky is the guy that does all the dirty work in the middle and never gets any credit. But without him, I don't think the defense is nearly as good. I don't think Aiden Hutchinson gets nearly as many sacks and pressures. I don't think James Houston gets nearly as much production without John Kaminsky. And for a guy to come in and have that kind of an impact as a waiver wire pickup after training camp has already started, that's a guy that deserves a big contract. That's a guy that deserves a 2-3-year extension to stay in Detroit. And I think the fact that the Detroit Lions were 9-2 with John Kaminsky on the field speaks volumes to how well the Lions played when he was there and how poorly the defense played when John Kaminsky was unavailable. Now, the last player that I think is a must re-sign for the Detroit Lions is a player that, again, was a late addition in free agency. Somebody that didn't go in the first wave, didn't go in the second wave of free agency, was kind of a later pickup, somebody that, hey, could be a late pickup, could be kind of a impactful player, but probably isn't going to be a superstar in Detroit. And that is Isaiah Buggs. Isaiah Buggs was a late addition to the Brad Holmes 2022 offseason additions, but he was very good. He came in immediately and started at a defensive tackle position. And when it comes to essentially being a run stopper, Isaiah Buggs was one of the best players on the Detroit Lions defense at doing so, and he had flashes during the season, especially late in the season about Minnesota onward, where he showed some really good pass rushing ability as well. The one thing that really sticks out to me is, of course, that play versus Dalvin Cook against the Minnesota Vikings, where he just obliterated the offensive line, got in the backfield, forced a fumble, and really helped the Detroit Lions win that football game off big plays and big turnovers. Isaiah Buggs is another player in the middle that doesn't get a lot of respect, doesn't really get a lot of recognition, but he is somebody that was so impactful on the running game and made some plays against the pass that you just need to have those guys that work hard, guys that have grit. And even if he's not a full-time starter going into next year, whether it be drafting Jalen Carter, signing Daron Payne, signing a superstar, trading for somebody with that kind of work ethic, somebody with that kind of production, somebody with that kind of impact on your defense is somebody you need to keep around in Detroit. Moving on to tier 2 of free agency, these are guys that I would like to see return to Detroit, guys that I would really like to see come back and have a role in the Detroit Lions organization for the future, but may be coming at too high of a cost, may not necessarily want to come back, or just guys that might not fit in the building because of cost or reason. Now, the first player that fits that criteria is DeShon Elliott. Now, DeShon Elliott was great. I am not disputing his impact. I'm not disputing whether he was a good fit or whether I even want him back in Detroit. I do. I want DeShon Elliott to be a Detroit Lion for quite a while, but after having a really good season, totaling over 90 tackles, an interception, a couple different turnovers, he was a very good starting caliber safety, and there are going to be teams bidding for DeShon Elliott. The safety market is pretty big this year, but DeShon Elliott is one of the younger and more productive players in that market, and for teams like the Ravens who might want to re-sign him back, or teams that really struggled in the secondary at that safety position, DeShon Elliott could be somebody that is a big target, could be somebody that's seeing $7, $8, $9 million at the safety position yearly, and that could just be something the Lions aren't ready to pay for with big contracts coming up, with, of course, just paying Tracy Walker a big safety contract and having multiple picks to address the safety position in the NFL draft. it might just not be worth the value to bring back Deshaun Elliott. Now, if the contract is right, I would love to see number 5 suit back up in Detroit, but if not, I don't think it's a must-have player because they have Tracy Walker returning, they have Kirby Joseph developing, and they have draft picks to address the position if need be. Now, in a similar vein, I think DJ Chark might be gone as well. DJ Chark kind of came on late into the NFL season as he was injury-prone very early in the year, but on the last 8 to 9 weeks of the season, DJ Chark returned and was very good. He was a true number 1 weapon for the Detroit Lions, was a huge play threat, had multiple big plays for the Detroit Lions over the last couple of games of the season, and is somebody I would love to see come back and to continue to develop with Jared Goff. But with the incredibly depleted wide receiver market this year, DJ Chark may be the top option for maybe the top option for numerous NFL teams that are looking for a new wide receiver 1, whereas the Lions don't really need it, right? They have Josh Reynolds, who was wide receiver 1 2 years ago. They have Jameson Williams, who's developing. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's really productive-wise the wide receiver 1 in the offense. And we've seen with TJ Hockenson moving on, the Lions don't need a true, number 1 weapon. They can win with a committee approach, right? They can win by dispersing the football and giving it to other people. And even if DJ Chark leaves, right, I don't think a wide receiving core of Jameson Williams and Josh Reynolds and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Khalif Raymond is necessarily a bad receiving core at all. But I'd like to see him return. He was a big play threat. He was a very good wide receiver. He made some big and some clutch plays throughout the season. And he and Jared Goff really started to connect at the end of the year. And I think adding him to a wide receiver core with that, having a 5-deep wide receiver core of Chark, Williams, Reynolds, St. Brown, and Raymond is going to give you a lot of production and a lot of success. But if other teams are offering him $15 million a year, 12 to 15 a year, that just might be a little too much for the Detroit Lions to pay. And if they lose him, I don't think it's as big of a loss as guys like maybe John Kaminsky or Jamal Williams in the first tier. Now, another guy that kind of fits that is Evan Brown. Evan Brown played a lot this season at the right guard position and played a lot 2 years ago at the center position. I think he is easily a top 20 center in the NFL, and I think he is pretty easily a starting caliber guard at the NFL as well. But he'll be a backup on the Detroit Lions. Unless Halapaloe Vaitai is cut, he will be a backup yet again and is going into a free agency contract where he'll probably have the opportunity to get paid starting money. He'll have the opportunity to go out there and get starting time, get playing time, and get starting caliber money for his efforts in Detroit. And if that is the case, I don't think the Lions can afford to pay a long-term starting caliber contract to a guy that is more of a reserve player, especially with contracts like Jonah Jackson's coming up very soon. I think that Evan Brown, for the right price, I would love to have back. Or if you're going to re-sign him and cut Big V, that is also an option. But you can't have all 6 on starting caliber contracts and expect to be able to pay the defense the rest of what they deserve. So Evan Brown, I think, is somebody I would love to come back, but with kind of just the market for guards and centers and knowing that there are teams that could really upgrade their offensive line with Evan Brown under center, I think it could just be the end naturally for Evan Brown as a Detroit Lion. Now, these two players, I think, are a very similar position. Amani Oruwariye and Will Harris are both players that are coming up on their free agency contracts. Both players have impacted the Detroit Lions secondary pretty significantly in their time, both negatively and positively, and I think they're both players that could re-sign with the Detroit Lions. I think neither will have a huge market after the years that they just had, and while Will Harris had a very slow start in Detroit, he has developed over the last 2 years under Aaron Glenn and has been a little bit better here and there. Not that he's a great corner necessarily or a great safety, but if you have to rely on somebody, there are worse cornerbacks in the NFL than Will Harris, and of course, Amani Oruwariye had a really bad down year, but he had that year coming off of an extremely high good year where he was a borderline Pro Bowl talent and had the opportunity to make a lot of money coming off a 6 interception season. Now, I don't think either one of these players is going to have an extremely big market, and I think both of them could come back as cornerbacks 4 and 5 necessarily to really help and boost the depth of this cornerback class. Now, if they were to re-sign, that doesn't mean I don't think the Lions should take cornerback in the draft or sign a veteran in free agency after. But if your 4 and 5 or your 5 and 6 cornerbacks are Will Harris and Amani Oruwariye, I think your secondary is in a pretty good position, as both have starting experience, both have had some very good games and made some very good plays, and both have been with the Aaron Glenn system for a long time and won't need to learn the playbook. So worst case scenario, you have some bad injuries and you pull out Amani Oruwariye and Will Harris to start for you on the cornerback positions. It's not ideal, but it could be much worse than, say, if they're both gone and you're relying on UDFAs or somebody that hasn't proven themselves in the NFL. The last player that I really want to talk about as a potential return is Brock Wright. Now again, I don't think Brock Wright is going to have a huge market necessarily because he hasn't put up huge numbers. He's not a big name. He's not somebody that most NFL fans are even going to know right off the top of their head. But he is a very productive player. He is somebody that kind of just works hard, doesn't really get recognition, but I mean, is very productive, is very efficient for the Detroit Lions, was a pretty much the tight end one after TJ Hawkinson left and was very good at it. So I think if the Lions can return Brock Wright, I would really like to see Brock Wright return for the right price. But if he's going to get paid a decent amount of money, like legit starting money, I wouldn't pay him that much because I don't think he's really produced all that much. And of course, you have James Mitchell, who just came in as a 5th round draft pick, but I think he will be pretty cheap to re-sign. I don't think he'll get top 32 tight end money even. I think you'll be able to re-sign him really cheap and pair him up with James Mitchell to have a pretty dynamic tight end duo going into next season. Now moving on to players that I think the Lions should let walk. Now these players are guys that didn't necessarily were horrible with the Detroit Lions, weren't guys that necessarily were bad, but just guys that I think either aren't worth the value or you could upgrade pretty easily or just don't really deserve a chance to come back and play again because they just didn't earn their spots. First player on the list is Mike Hughes. Mike Hughes was a pretty big signing last offseason and was expected to come in and start at cornerback 1 or be the slot cornerback. He was expected to have a big role in the defense, and he only really ended up playing 6 games. Was okay. I mean, wasn't a huge weakness necessarily, but also wasn't a big strength. I think you can upgrade at the cornerback position, right? If you go into next season with Okudah and Amani and Harris and Jacobs, and then you upgrade 1 in free agency and 1 in the draft, I really just don't think Hughes has a huge role. I think you have a couple different guys that can play the slot cornerback position for cheaper, and I just really don't think it's worth extending him past this year, but I don't think he played bad in Detroit necessarily. Another guy that I think the Lions should let walk is Chris Board. I think the linebacker position is going to get filled up very quick. You, of course, have Rodrigo and Barnes completely under contract. Josh Woods is somebody that I would like to see Detroit Lions return as well. He is actually in tier 1. I forgot to mention him. Just as a special teams captain, as a presence, I think they should re-sign him for relatively cheap. But outside of that, you don't really have a whole lot, right? So Chris Board played pretty well early in the season, but didn't really impact the game late in the year. You know, I think that you go into next season with Anzalone, Woods, Rodrigo, and Barnes. You really only need 1 more linebacker in which you can add either through the free agency class or the draft. I think you can get better value than Chris Board. I think you can, just get better at the position in general. And not necessarily that Chris Board played poorly. If they were to return him, I wouldn't be mad because, again, he was a pretty good special teams player, was a decent defensive player when we needed him to be so. But I just don't think it's really worth signing when you have the opportunities to upgrade through free agency and the draft, respectively. Another player like that is Justin Jackson. Again, a pretty big impact player on the offensive side of the ball, but somebody that you just don't really need to re-sign, right? If you need him really late in free agency, he's probably going to be there. But you could also go out and draft a running back in the 5th, 6th, or even 7th round and get very similar production from what Justin Jackson was able to accomplish. And with Craig Reynolds coming back healthy, I just don't think he's the biggest need. Another guy on the list is Nate Sudfeld. Didn't play last year. I think you have the opportunity to upgrade backup quarterback. If not, he'll probably be available at some point during the preseason. And then Austin Bryant is another player. He is officially up for a contract extension, and I just don't think you really need him. Looking at the edge rusher position right now, you have Hutchinson, you have Houston, you have the Okwara brothers, you have Pascal, you have Charles Harris essentially still right now, and of course John Kaminsky, who are expected to re-sign. I just don't think Austin Bryant has a huge role in the defense anymore. I don't think he'll have a big market, but if he does, if he has really any market, I don't think the Lions are going to be one of the teams competing for Bryant's services. He can be a decent rotational or depth piece, but the Lions are very deep at edge and really just don't need the player themselves. So with that being said, that is kind of all of the big free agents coming off the board, right? Those are really the big guys, the big names that the Lions should consider re-signing. There are some other guys like, of course, Tommy Kramer or Scott Daly or Dan Skipper who are depth or who should not really play a whole lot but were a little bit impactful when they were on the field. Those are guys that, again, like you could sign for the right price, but again, they'll be available in free agency. They won't have a huge market. If you need their services, they'll be available pretty much whenever you need them. So with that being said, that is really the free agency outlook, right? You have some guys that are really important. You have some guys that you like to see return but aren't going to overpay, aren't going to break the bank for. And there are some guys where it's just time to move on and upgrade that position or just replace them with cheaper value, whatever the case may be. So with that being said, that is my free agency rank. Because I think the biggest needs for this team and the biggest players that need to re-sign are Jamal Williams, Alex Anzalone, John Kaminsky, and Isaiah Buggs. And for the right price, I would love to see the Detroit Lions bring back Deshaun Elliott, DJ Chark, Evan Brown, Will Harris, Amani Oruwariye, and Brock Wright. Those are guys that are all impactful. Those are guys that all have helped the Detroit Lions reach the heights that they have. And whether it be for depth or starting purposes, I think all of those players could positively impact the Detroit Lions moving forward. So with all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think about the free agency class? How many free agents do you think the Lions are going to re-sign, and what players do you think the Lions are going to let walk out of the organization? I'd be very curious what you guys think. With all that being said, though, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. Until next time, and as always, go Lions.